So today we're doing Steph Curry to cap off the player profile series. Um, Bittersweet, right? Because this was a beautiful way to break down each Warriors player going into next season. But um, I am going to break down and analyze the greatest player of our generation, um, the greatest shooter ever, but not limited to that label, right? One of the elite scorers we've ever seen in the NBA. One of the greatest playmakers to step foot on the hardwood. One of the greatest competitors that have ever lived. Wardell, Stephen Curry the second. So to start off, his stats last season, he played 56 games. Obviously, he had two injuries that kept him out a number of games. Starting with the labrum tear, and then obviously that lower leg injury he sustained or he suffered against Dallas. I believe in February. So he was out for around, 26 games, if my math is correct. But he averaged 29.4 points, 6 rebounds, about 6.3 assists, on 49.3 from the field, 42.7 from 3, and 91.5% from the line. So one of the great volume and efficiency scores we've ever seen, and that hasn't changed in his age 35 season, right? Year, I think 13, right? Year 12, year 13. Um, Steph Curry remains an elite offensive player, and that reflects in his production, right? But also there is a give and take with that, right? Him having to produce more as a scorer was a result of our team not being good enough overall. And so he had to compensate for that. And obviously, the efficiency is always going to remain elite, but the idea is to sustain and create a winning formula. We're going to need to build a team around him where there's less pressure on him to score or to produce as much as he did last season, right? Last season is not the blueprint for a championship team. So even though he produced well and showed that he can still play at a high level, that he's in his prime, uh, it's not a winning formula. And then in the playoffs, he played 13 games, 38 minutes per game, so heavy minutes, around 30 and a half points per game, a touch over 5 rebounds and 6 assists, about a steal, half a block, on 46.6 from the field, which is pretty good uh, considering, and 36.3 from 3, which is not so great, given the fact that he is the greatest shooter of all time, and we have to hold him to those standards. He just didn't shoot the ball well in that Lakers series, and we can kind of chalk that up to a myriad of reasons, right? Whether it be his legs got tired, he ran out of gas, they were attacking him on defense. Um, a lot of reasons we can kind of explain the drop off at the 3-point line in the playoffs, but the idea is next season he's fresh enough so that if he does have to be high volume from behind the perimeter, he can sustain that over the course of a series, so he doesn't have to carry as much a load throughout the regular season and even the first round, right? Dropping 50 points in Game 7. He just had a lot of responsibilities placed on his shoulders to compensate and carry players that simply weren't playing up to par, up to the standard their pay grade suggested that they should. And then at the free throw line, 84.5%. Again, significant drop off, right? He's religiously in the low 90s, at worst high 80s. So in being in the mid 80s is definitely a disappointment. But overall, a great season, right? It was unstable and unsustainable from the start. A lot went wrong throughout, and we can go from injuries and the punch, and players missing time, different lineups being played, young players not getting their opportunity. So there was a lot to navigate, but again, he's the one constant that we can depend on year in, year out to not only produce, but do it at an efficient level and reliably, right? So to start off with his greatest strength, he is the greatest shooter of all time. An elite floor spacer, right? the defenses have to command attention. His respect as a shooter extends beyond the traditional 24 to 26 feet out 3-point line, right? He is guarded at the half court line, right? As soon as he brings the ball up half court, defenses are locked in and keyed in on his skill set, what he's able to do as a shooter. So he's able to spread them out. He's able to really create spacing for his teammates and put defenses at a disadvantage inherently just through his presence as a guy who can shoot the ball better than anyone's ever lived. The last 2 seasons on catch and shoot threes, he shot a touch over 40% from three, which is elite given his volume, right? Because he shoots the three more than any player as well. So not only is his efficiency among the elite, but his volume is otherworldly, right? No players really get as many attempts off as Steph Curry does, which makes him so great, right? With the efficiency he does it at. And then on pull-up threes, he shot a touch under 41% over the last 2 seasons. And even a couple of years ago, right, he shot really poorly overall from the 3-point line, 38% on the season. And obviously that's a decent mark for most players, but for his standards, that was a down year shooting the ball. But even considering that down year, right, because a 2-year sample size is significant, he still has shot around 41% on pull-up threes. Given his volume, that's a significant mark. And I expect this skill set to translate as he ages for years to come, right? He can only improve at this as a shooter. And so that's a big deal. And that kind of is the start of how he's able to open up things for his teammates, for himself, and play a winning brand of basketball, right, through the motion offense. So we'll kind of get into those things a bit later, but it all starts with him being the greatest shooter of all time. I also mentioned he's a very good guard rebounder. Over the last 2 seasons, he's averaged 5.6 rebounds per game at 6'3". Very few guards are as active and as consciously, they put as much conscious effort into rebounding the basketball, right? We've seen players kind of chase rebounds for particular, reasons, whether it be statistics or, round numbers, trying to get triple doubles or whatever. But when you watch Steph rebound the basketball, it is purely out of, from a competitive nature standpoint. He is willing to put his body on the line amongst the trees, chase misses, put a body on his man and just dig down deep and get his hands dirty. And very few superstars at his size and even you talk about the elite wings. Some don't even rebound the ball as well as him. So Steph's ability to just set the tone and set a level and a standard of competitive spirit that reverberates throughout the organization. He not only talks the talk, but he walks the walk because he has every excuse not to rebound the basketball. But he gets his hands dirty and he gets inside the scrum. And that's something that I've taken notice of the last few seasons. And there are moments where he's acknowledged we haven't rebounded the ball to the level that we should, or we need to do a better job of it. And he'll make that effort himself to lead by example and use rebounding as a marker of winning basketball and try to really emphasize that particular part of the game. So again, doesn't really get discussed enough about, but it's extremely noticeable if you really pay attention to him on a game-to-game basis. And I don't want that to get overlooked. I mentioned, by the way, the reason the order of this is going to be a little bit odd is because I literally didn't have enough space to order things properly. So the next thing on here is backdoor cuts. And that's kind of one of the counters that he has. And that's another thing that's under the radar with Steph is his ability off the ball to cut backdoor is among the best we've ever seen because teams overplay him for the shot, whether it be, on and off the ball, because if he's on the ball and coming off a screen, he may give it up and then cut backdoor if they're overplaying that shot, whether they trap him or the defender just fights over the screen and recovers. Steph's ability to give and go, or even off the ball, if a team is top blocking, just back cut to the basket, is uncanny. And his timing, his ability to use his body to create separation and manipulate angles is why he's able to be so efficient as a scorer, is because he knows how to leverage himself off the ball so well, and that's reflected in his ability backdoor, right? Just cutting backdoor, understanding how to counter a defense that's overplaying him for the shot, which we've seen multiple teams in multiple series do, right? Against the Grizzlies, against the Celtics a couple of years ago, right? And he's managed to combat those coverages better than any player I think I've ever seen. And then I think the most important thing to acknowledge is his elite ability to score the basketball. And I mentioned earlier volume and efficiency. He shoots the ball as many times as the elite players do. So it's not just he's just shooting the ball from the perimeter 11 times a game. No, he's getting 18, 19 shots off. So while a significant chunk of those possessions are at the three-point line, there is also another chunk of possessions that are inside of the arc, where as a scorer, we're talking about the mid-range, we're talking about the floater area. His ability to just put the ball on the floor and create something off the bounce. We know that he's an elite ball handler. And something that I've noticed is his effective creativity. That's kind of what I'm going to call this. Where over the last few seasons, specifically in 2021, I noticed this, where he has found ways to be more efficient with his dribble. He will, perform less moves on the perimeter, with a tighter handle, get to his spots more efficiently. And while it may not be as flashy or as, as qualified for a highlight reel, it is more effective and it is more efficient when you talk about his ability to just move and be shifty on the ball, right? His ball handling, whether it be a crossover, behind the back, his ability to just pick his spots well and use his handle as leverage on the threat of his shot. Like, he has become a smarter ball handler. We talk about the creativity and the flashiness of it a lot, but we don't talk about the efficiency of just putting the ball on the floor and just getting to your spots, possession in, possession out. Just having a tight handle, squeezing through defenses, splitting double teams, really just understanding like where you want to go and what is the best way to get there in the fewest moves possible. And I feel like he has mastered that the last few seasons, better than he has even during his peak years, right? Where a lot of people consider 2015 to 2017. I feel like he's been more intentional and surgical with how he approaches a tight defense than in years past. And this has resulted in him being among the best finishers in the NBA as well, right? The ability to finish with the left hand, the right hand, any angle off the glass, whether it be high, low, reverse layups, the floater range. Like I said, he is a tough shot maker, and he can hit shots off the glass, unique angles that aren't really normal, right? Traditional shot selection that you'd think, players would usually take this type of shot, but Steph's ability to just kind of, twist and turn and squeeze his way into certain areas. We remember that Clippers game, for example, where he had 50 points. Paul George was talking about on his podcast that he thought he had Steph on lock, but he quickly found out that there's very little you can do to stop him. And that third quarter, he really got free for some looks in the paint. And he was just, falling down, scoop shots off the glass. Just the array of moves and just the tight space that he's able to just get shots off and then finish them at a high rate is abnormal. It's just not something we've ever seen, and I don't think it's something we'll ever see again. And it's a testament to his hand-eye coordination, for sure, but it's also a testament to his work ethic. Because if you watch him during warm-ups or during his training routines. He is always, intentionally keying in on unique, awkward angles off of the wrong foot with the wrong hand. And so these training sessions and this practice adds up to a player who's able to uniquely shift and adjust to whatever the defense throws at him and finish even in the most difficult situations. So again, that Clippers game is a very uh, potent example of this, where he was in crowds just flipping shots in, and it was a work of art, honestly. And like I mentioned, he's a tough shot maker. A guy that's just off the bounce. One shot that comes to mind, you guys remember the game against the Rockets early in the season where the shot clock was winding down and he just took a step back three, fading away from 32, 33 feet out. And it was a high arcing shot, a rainbow shot. Like, those are the tough shots that he can uniquely make at a 99th percentile, right? At the 99th percentile, very few players can even get a shot like that off. With the arc, with the off dribble ability, his ability to just attack mismatches and closeouts, right? He can hunt players, slower footed wings, or big men that have no business being on the perimeter, smaller guards like a Davion Mitchell. He can attack mismatches in a variety of ways. And like I mentioned, he's a threat from the mid-range. He can attack closeouts off the catch, put the ball on the floor and make something happen as a scorer. Get into that floater area where at the free throw line, we've seen him hit those push shots at the free throw line. Not just floaters from 6 feet out. We're talking about 12 feet out. Free throw line, one-handed push shots. So his ability to just put the ball on the floor in the floater area, even beyond the nail. We're talking about floaters from the wing, 13, 14 feet out. So his unique ability to just be a shot maker and hit shots is why it is reductive to just label him as the greatest shooter of all time, even though he's so great at that. And we've known that for years. Himself as just a basketball player, as an elite scorer, and as a pure shot maker is probably among the greatest of all time. When we talk about Michael Jordan, and the elite players, when we talk about scoring the basketball like a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, in terms of volume and efficiency, Shaquille O'Neal, LeBron is in that mix. Steph Curry is in that conversation. There's no doubt in my mind. And reducing him, labeling him as just a shooter, it takes away from his scoring production and his versatility. Because he's not somebody that's just shooting the basketball, even in the mid-range. He is taking one-handed shots with either hand, against in a crowd, multiple defenders coming at him, driving the ball, falling backwards, falling down, twisting, turning, squeezing through defenses, splitting double teams, scoop shots, underhanded shots, right? So it's 99th percentile stuff, one of one. So I don't think we've seen a shot maker in this generation as great as Steph Curry. Moving on, his off-ball movement, and that arguably could also be his greatest strength, his greatest asset, his gravity, right? Gravity off the ball, creating for his teammates, creating opportunities to score at the basket. In dribble handoff situations, right? When you have a screener who is, trying to a little get action, and Steph is kind of chasing the ball, and then coming off, whether it be a curl, pin down, just moving off the ball, and whether it be a relocation or a myriad of actions that we like to run, right? He finds ways to counter and make those situations effective. So in a dribble handoff situation, right, he's chasing the ball essentially. And if a team overplays that, right, whether it be the big comes up too high, the guard dies on the screen and just can't recover, he can either take that shot or make that play, make the pass out of that situation, and create an opportunity, an advantage for his team. So you have Kevon Looney, you have Draymond as the short roll threat downhill, being able to play in an advantage situation, right? And pin downs, curls, same concept. Now stretched out, right? Spreading out the defense and keeping them honest because he is so deadly on the perimeter. They have to overplay. Sometimes they throw two bodies at him and willingly give up an advantage because it's a better defensive possession. It's a better defensive outcome statistically to defend a 4-on-3 than to give up a moving shot off of a curl by Steph Curry. It's statistically advantageous for the defense to give up a disadvantage, a 4-on-3 or a 3-on-2, than to give Steph Curry a spot-up shot off a pin down or dribble handoff, whether it be at the three-point line, mid-range. You can't really run any coverage against him because he's that efficient as a shooter and as a scorer to where you have to overhelp, you have to overplay, you have to overreact. And when you do that, the result is an advantageous situation for the offense, which is Steph and the Warriors. So, and then a wrinkle he's added to this is the relocation. Because if a team is able to recover due to a unique player such as Anthony Davis or Jaren Jackson, a big who is more switchable, more nimble off his feet, or nimble on his feet, great foot speed and lateral ability, then the relocation is a wrinkle he's added where he can counter defenses and constantly be in motion. So now that gravity is a stream of consciousness, so to speak. It's never ending, constant motion. And so you can never take your eyes off him. You can never not have a body on him because if he's in constant movement, then he's always a threat, which creates panic, which creates chaos on the defensive side because now they have to take him into account. And so by nature, you're essentially you're attributing less attention to his teammates, right? And so we see his ability to just give and go, give the basketball up. If the first option's not there, he can attack where he's relocating for another pin down or another action off a screen. And the defense may not be quick enough to recover, right? Because in most situations, if you're in a disadvantage, you're going to have at least one or two players who aren't equipped to recover in those situations. So he is just so dynamic from that standpoint because very few players can keep a defense as honest within that 24-second shot clock as he does, right? You have 24 seconds. And if a play breaks down, many teams struggle to actually generate efficient quality possessions. But with the Warriors offense and given Steph's presence in those situations, his ability to create a continuous threat through 24 seconds is unique. It's I don't think any player's ever had that asset, that ability. So, and then that's also a testament to his conditioning, right? You can't run for 24 seconds if you're not physically able to, take those bumps, take those hits, that wear and tear, fight, around a screen, use your body to create separation, right? It's not easy moving baseline to baseline, pump faking, putting the ball on the floor, give it up, relocating in the corner, pump fake, one dribble shot. And that's a traditional, stream of actions that we've seen Steph do and perform over the course of his career, but you have to be able to do that physically. Just your heart rate, the ability to just be effective when you're tired, be efficient when it's 42, 43, 45 minutes in a game, and your level of play remains at that level, remains that efficient and the same. So his conditioning is 99th percentile as well, because he's able to play at such a high level in such a rigorous, taxing, a system that very few players can physically handle, right? Because you are in constant motion, you are in constant movement, ball movement, player movement, and he is the center of that. And then also on-ball playmaking, right? He is a high-level on-ball playmaker. Just with the ball in his hands in the pick and roll, being able to just make simple reads, whether it be pocket passes to Draymond, kickouts to the corner, collapsing a defense because he has respect inside the arc as well, right? So defenses have to take into account his ability to score with the ball on the floor, and that opens up his drive and kick ability, whether it be to Wiggins or to guys like GP2, as we've seen. So, like I've said, he has gravity as a driver as well, because he's that efficient of a scorer. So you have to respect him, 26 feet in. Not just 26 feet out, but 26 feet in. So, like I said, pick and roll, he has a myriad of ways. He can throw lobs. He is so underrated as a lob passer, by the way. If you rewatch his film from 2013, 2014, 2015, playing alongside Andrew Bogut, he's actually one of the elite lob passers at that time. And I still believe he is, but we just haven't seen the volume of it because Kevon Looney has been our starting center, and he's not necessarily equipped in those positions. But I still believe that if you pair a lob threat next to Steph Curry, he would look just as good as any other traditional point guard in those situations. So, as the pick and roll ball handler, we've seen him assume and excel at those responsibilities as well as any traditional point guard of this era or ever, right? And I'm not saying that he's as great as the Magic Johnsons on the ball as a playmaker. I'm not even saying he's as good as a Chris Paul. But what I am saying is he's among the best, right? He is among the best on the ball, right? We've seen him average 8, 9 assists in the season. So he can do it. The question is the volume. It's not the ability. It's the volume, right? It's the system. The system that he plays in doesn't demand responsibilities, doesn't demand that particular play style. So you're not going to see that reflected in his assist numbers. But he's still generating creation in other ways. And then, like I said as well, his court vision is actually quite good. I actually think it's improved over time. His court vision has always been quite good, but last season, especially that Game 4 against the Lakers, he had 14 assists, and he was just passing in ways I've never seen, right? Driving downhill behind the back to a cutting DiVincenzo. Just very few players can make a play like that. It's such a tight window, right? And that play sticks out to me. Being able to just no looks, right? In transition, finding guys, a bullet pass, rifle pass, right? And finding guys in the dunker spot, cutting, at 45 cuts. Like I said, the kickouts, pick and roll partners. So he is as able and stable as any guard in that situation as you'll find. In those situations, rather. Because if a team forces him to assume on-ball responsibilities, or let's say in 2022 when Draymond was out for an extended period of time due to his back injury, we've seen Steph elevate his level of play as an on-ball playmaker and compensate for those deficiencies, across the roster, right? So, obviously he gets disrespected and discounted for these particular items due to his lack of production in these categories. But make no mistake, his ability is among the best, even to this day. And then the outlet pass, right, in transition. Now, obviously, we get annoyed with this particular, pass at times because it results in turnovers, and sometimes it's just a little bit lazily thrown, a little too casually, or cavalierly thrown, so it's easily picked off by the defense. But he still has performed many on-target, on-point outlet passes, particularly to guys like Andrew Wiggins or Clay, right? For transition, easy buckets, and opportunities. So that should not go under the radar as well. I wouldn't consider him one of the better outlet passers, but he's still good. He's still a good outlet passer for sure. And he's dynamic. Positionally, he's dynamic. See, people like to use the combo guard and Steph is really a 2 against him, but actually it's a testament. It is a reflection of his dynamicism, how dynamic he is as a basketball player. He's a combo guard. That means he can play 2 positions, the 1 and the 2. How many players can say that? If you look among the elite guards, how many players can say he can play the 1 at an elite level, he can play the 2 at an elite level? That's a good thing. That's positive. That's a strength. And in closing lineups, he can play on and off the ball, right? So if you want to play him at the 1, pick and roll, high ball screen, right, as a scorer, or as a playmaker, if a team decides to blitz or trap, he's able to get rid of the ball and create plays for his teammates. Advantageous situations, right? And those 4-on-3s are a direct result of teams overplaying the Steph Curry ball screen and presence in those actions. So he can play on and off the ball. We've seen Draymond with the ball in his hands during the clutch find Steph off the ball for opportunities. We saw it against Memphis at times, where Steph was kind of moving and in motion, and Draymond would kind of find him, and then Steph would create or take the shot. I can name direct plays, exact examples, where Steph is coming in transition against Boston, off the ball, and Draymond finds him for a little bounce pass, and Steph puts the Warriors up by 6, or I think 5 or 6, in the fourth quarter with a minute and a half to go. Right? Derek White trailing him, Steph, little jab step, rises up, a little separation, knocks it down. Huge shot, off the ball. We've seen him do it against Memphis, coming off a stagger screen. Right? We're down by, I think, 6 or 7 points at the time, and Steph hits a huge shot where Draymond finds him, has a little bit of daylight, knocks it down, cuts the lead down to 4. These plays are ingrained in my memory, tattooed in my mind. So we've seen him do both, on and off the ball, in closing situations, thrive. Play the 1 and the 2. Skill set, play style, anything you want. Anything you need for those situations against any team, across any matchup, along any personnel, right? You can put any set of players around him, and we'll get to that as well. His counters are endless. Off the ball, face guarding. We've seen Boston do that. We've seen Memphis do that, where they'll just put a body on him and take him out completely of the offense. And basically say, look, we're willing to concede a 4-on-4. We're willing to concede a disadvantage to our defense. An inherent disadvantage, because now you're playing in more space, greater space. So you're basically expanding the court by putting one body on Steph Curry and not looking the other way. You are essentially cutting off 20% of your defense for one player. And so when you want to face guard Steph, we saw Marcus Smart do this in Game 5, particularly. And what had happened was Draymond got free because the lanes opened up, right? Klay Thompson got free. Andrew Wiggins got free. And so all 3 players had their best games of the series. That was one of the most dominant wins we had in those finals. And so when you look at that game in particular, Steph did not shoot the ball well from the field. But that's not a direct reflection of his impact, because they face guarded him throughout that game. And multiple players had their best game in the series in that one game. And it's because the Celtics decided to concede a disadvantage and say, look, we'd rather, because you got to remember, Steph just dropped 43 points in Boston. So they're like, look, we'd rather play 4v4 than 5v5 and involve Steph Curry in those actions. And what had happened was they got blown off the court. They made a good run in that third quarter, but they'd gotten blown off the court in the end. Top locking. When you talk about putting a body on Steph so he literally doesn't have an opportunity to run off of a screen. Literally locking him from running towards the perimeter in an action, whether it be a curl or a DHO. And what you're doing is essentially inviting a layup. You're inviting a 2-point basket. Dylan Brooks did this. He's done this in the play-in. He did it in the Memphis series when we played the Grizzlies. Top locking Steph Curry, conceding a layup. And Steph was incredible in the paint in those series. Or in that series and in the playing game. Because he was cutting backdoor every time. Backdoor, bump off, backdoor. And Draymond was finding him. Guys were just bounce pass, boom. And the reason for that was because they were just playing him for the shot. So he was just freeing up in the paint. So there is nothing he can't do offensively. Under any circumstance, against any coverage or schemes. You can play zone, and I don't think that's been done for the last decade, because if you play zone against Steph Curry, you're basically admitting to throwing a game. Like, you can't play zone, because if you play zone, he's just going to shoot your face off. Right? You're just conceding open shots at that point. So, that's off the ball. Now, on the ball, you want to play drop coverage. Well, we saw how that worked in the finals. They switched their coverage up 3 different times. Switching, drop, trapping, face guarding. They switched it up. They didn't have an answer. They had nothing. Drop coverage was the answer. Really, actually, it was the best answer, because what you did was you limited him to just being an efficient scorer. And once you decided to switch it up, chaos ensued. You lost 3 straight games, Boston, for that reason. 3 different schemes across 3 different games. Drop coverage worked through 4 games. You were tied at 2 apiece. That's a win, honestly, because you're playing an all-time great, and so now it's a best of 3. But what they decided to do in Game 5 was because Steph had killed drop coverage so badly. Al Horford, and mind you, this isn't traditional drop coverage. This isn't 2 feet at the elbow. This is 2 feet at the 3-point line. Drop coverage at the 3-point line, because Steph Curry is shooting from 28, 29 feet out. Drop coverage in those finals. Make no mistake. People like to chalk up Steph's production and efficiency due to quote-unquote drop coverage. No. Drop coverage against Steph Curry is a 28, 29 contested shot. An inefficient, low-quality look that most players would get benched for off the dribble, because they're not capable of hitting that shot. Even point guards. Even the great point guards we've seen in the NBA of this era could not punish a defense like that consistently. So you look at what they did, what Boston did, drop coverage. Steph punished them at such an efficient level, they couldn't sustain it. You look at ice coverage, right? And that's a unique coverage where you see in the pick and roll, you shading the ball handler towards the baseline, using the baseline as a third defender. The problem with that is he's such an adept on-ball passer. He can just find the rolling man with the bounce pass, take the floater off the glass, take a step back midi towards the baseline. So you can play ice coverage, but he can just beat you with a myriad of options, myriad of counters. Single coverage. And the funny thing about single coverage is that that's the equivalent of the face guarding or top locking. Like, you're basically conceding, you're basically cutting off an entire part of the offense and conceding a disadvantage. You're basically saying, look, we're willing to guard you in space 1v1. And so, because Steph is as great a scorer as we've ever seen, right? We saw what he was able to do against guys like, Al Horford. And that was off a switch. That's fair. But even Dylan Brooks, single coverage, right? You want to talk about point of attack. No switching, his matchup. Just slicing and dicing. Getting by his man, triple threat. Able to play on the perimeter, use his footwork to create separation, and beat his man, whether be in the mid-range, with a step back, put the ball on the floor, get to the paint with a floater, draw a foul at the basket, or hit a tough shot at the 3-point line. You can't play him in single coverage. We saw what the Thunder did when they tried to do that. And they were switching, of course. But, again, and we'll kind of get to that a little bit later, single coverage, because when you're switching, you're still giving up a mismatch. So, unless you have 4 or 5 wings on the court, single coverage is almost never going to be effective at this point. Because we've seen it. We've seen teams just play Steph straight up. And he's too efficient at his level for you to get away with that as a defense. We even saw it many years ago. In fact, this less so applies to today. Like, I'm thinking through, like, all these series where, like, when has Steph really played in single coverage as of late? And the answer is really, like, even against the Lakers, right? Dennis Schroeder. And he was burning him as well. You look at the numbers. But if you really want to talk about single coverage, look at the Mark Jackson era, where they were running straight isolation. And Steph had some of his greatest breakout seasons ever in those years. Right? Just pure skill work. And those seasons, he was giving you 47 from the field, 43, 44 from the 3-point line. Just pure skill work. Shiftiness. Being able to just create off the bounce, get to his spots, take advantage of a lack of quickness or his ability to just create separation, right? So if you want to really look at single coverage, look at his early prime seasons where he is, 2013, 2014, those years. And he was among the top 10 players in the NBA at that time. Consensus. So even during the come-up, right, teams couldn't stop him. Greg Popovich likened him. He said it was like watching Michael Jordan. Look it up. Look up the quote. Greg Popovich, Steph Curry, Michael Jordan. He said during that Spurs series in 2013, they couldn't stop him. They were running single coverage, every type of scheme. And he was just slicing them up. And he took that great Spurs team to 6 games. Tough 6. You look at blitzing, right? And I'll kind of pair blitzing and trapping because they're a little bit different. But in the end, you're giving up an advantage. You're basically saying, look, we're throwing 2 at you, and we're conceding an advantage or a disadvantage for the defense. We're basically saying we are happy to play against a 4-on-3 as long as it's not Steph Curry with the basketball. We just don't want Steph to be involved in the offense in any way, shape, or form on the ball. Get the ball out of his hands. Let's just recover and rotate. And we've seen teams like, we can start with the Cavs, right, in those final series, 2015. One of the greatest playmaking series in NBA history, if you actually look at it. Steph's ability to create out of the trap. Andre Iguodala benefited. You look at hockey assists in that series, Steph Curry's hockey assists were through the roof because the Cavs were essentially saying, look, we're going to just give up open shots to Andre Iguodala, open shots to Draymond Green, open shots to Harrison Barnes, and they're going to have to beat us. And at some point, Iguodala was able to just be super efficient in those spots, against that matchup in those possessions. Hitting corner threes, picking on those mismatches, and even as a cutter at the basket, dunker spot, punishing a broken down defense. And they were conceding those situations because they were willingly trapping the ball screen, blitzing Steph at half court. So, that's obviously one example. We can go even to the 2017 finals where you have Kevin Durant alongside. And in the pick and roll, they were not giving up a Steph Curry three. They were giving up a Kevin Durant switch or mid-range, conceding that mismatch. But as long as it wasn't Steph coming off that ball screen with an open look, even just a sliver of daylight, then the defense won in their eyes. And so that was a winning outcome for them. You talk about the hedge. We've seen teams hedge before, but if you hedge, there isn't a spot on the court Steph Curry can't shoot from. So if you want to give up like 29, 31 footers, or you want to give up his ability to just drive with his left or right and just get to the basket because he's quick enough, he's speedy enough to just take advantage of those openings, those lanes. And so he'll punish you off the bounce and just dribble penetration if you hedge. Or he can shoot from there as well. Shoot from however far out you decide to hedge, he can just shoot from there. But like I said, I think out of all of these, the greatest advantage creator, the greatest outcome is when you decide to blitz or trap him. Because even though, ideally, if you look at the numbers, and I've studied this, like I've done basically a rundown of like, okay, let's break down, let's reverse engineer. What is the best outcome for the defense? The best outcome is probably an average shooter taking an open shot, then an elite shooter taking a contested shot. Statistically, that's accurate. It's better to give Harrison Barnes an open look or Andre Iguodala at 38 years old against the Raptors, or Alfonso McKinney, even Klay Thompson, right? Because you talk about that Raptors series, one of the greatest playmaking series of our lifetime, of this era. And most of it was done off the ball. But you talk about even on the ball, when Steph had the ball in his hands, whether it be, creating for himself or coming off an action off the ball, they were just throwing bodies at him. 2, 3 bodies at him, 4 bodies at times. And so he was just finding Draymond, finding Iggy, finding, the open man, making the right plays so that open shots and open looks were created. Advantages were created. And so you want to talk about, like, the Raptors ended up winning that series because obviously Klay got hurt, but we just didn't have enough firepower in those positions to punish that coverage, right? Even in 2016, we can talk about Steph wasn't fully healthy. We can talk about the Draymond situation. But at the end of the day, Harrison Barnes was open on dozens of looks. And he just missed a significant portion of them. Because the greatest outcome for that Cavs defense was an open Harrison Barnes shot. An open Draymond Green shot. Look at Draymond's highlight reel of that 37-point Game 7. 32 point. I think it was 32 points. He was open on all of those shots because of Steph Curry. They were overplaying Steph. They were basically conceding open looks for average shooters rather than conceding a contested look for an elite shooter. So, very few players have had as rigorous a coverage, have faced as keyed in on a defense as Steph Curry has. And then I made a bullet of its own. I just said switching, right? Because switching can be done on and off the ball, right? Teams can switch off the ball. If Steph's in constant movement, you can just... The Lakers did a good job of this. The Cavs did a great job of this in 2016, right? So that you kind of cut off these actions and you burn some shot clock and you cut off the lanes that Steph has, the paths or the routes off the ball, whether it be the pin downs, the curls, the bread and butter actions the Warriors like to run. So switching can be done on and off the ball, right? Even in a ball screen or in pick and roll, you just put the big or you put a wing on Steph, and now you kind of cut off that advantage. But we've seen Steph against switching defenses too. And we saw it against Boston towards the latter end of that series against Al Horford, against Marcus Smart, guys who were just conceding switches. He was cooking Jaylen Brown, right? And he was just too shifty, too smart, too cerebral, uh, too experienced for them. Like he was just taking what they gave him, whether it be the drive, the shot, creating off the bounce. Switching is a testament to your shot creation. If you struggle against switching defenses, then it's probably because you're not as advanced or layered an offensive player. So his ability to attack switches, and it's developed throughout the years, right? He's early in his career, he was less capable of efficiently punishing switches. But I think as his career went on, he became much stronger, much more cerebral and surgical with how he would attack those situations and those matchups. You look against the Rockets series in 2018, like they were putting Capella on him. They were putting guys like PJ Tucker on him in 2019. And so they were willingly giving up the mismatch, like slower footed wings or just completely immobilized bigs. And so Steph kind of through the years figured out how to more efficiently punish these matchups, these mismatches. Mind you, against the Thunder in 2016, he just did a masterful job in that Game 7. They were putting Serge Ibaka, they were putting Steven Adams, they were putting Kevin Durant on him. Guys who are, bordering 7 feet. Yeah, they have length. Yeah, their wingspan is difficult to overcome. They have size, they have reach, they can guard in space. They force you to extend and take deeper shots. But Steph was hitting those shots. He was punishing those mismatches on the perimeter, possession in, possession out, for a string of possessions. Like KD was on him, Steven Adams was on him, Serge Ibaka was on him. He had no problem. No problem. So you can switch on Steph Curry as well, but he will eventually, right? He may struggle like against the Rockets in 2018. He struggled to start the series, no doubt. But as the series went on, he became more and more comfortable with taking advantage of the looks he was given, right? Getting to the basket, taking those step back threes. He's just become more potent in those situations over time. And then, obviously we're still on strengths right now, but he is the system, right? We talk about, the motion offense and, playing within the flow of the game and all that. He is the system. There is no motion offense. There is no flow without Steph Curry. There is no continuation. There is no constancy to how we play. Ball movement, player movement. If Steph Curry's not on the floor, it just doesn't work. So he creates these scoring opportunities because of his presence and because of his buying in to the system, being the center of it. His portability, right? His ability to play amongst a variety of lineups, versatility, right? Just multiple defenders, multiple non-shooters, non-spacers, guys who are less skilled, maybe less equipped to score the basketball, but more defensive-minded, defensive-oriented. And his ability to just adjust in those situations, right? Playing even next to less equipped defensive lineups, like multiple guards, Jordan Poole, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and making those work, right? And we saw that against Denver. So my point is that his ability to just play in a variety of lineups, again, with a variety of skill sets and play styles against a variety of matchups is probably the greatest of this era and maybe the greatest ever, right? Because his adaptability, his ability to just play within different schemes, right? Because if you're playing with a bunch of non-shooters, you have to approach your game offensively differently than as if you were playing next to a bunch of spacers, guys who can shoot. So the balance that he's able to achieve amongst a variety of personnel is, like I said, I don't think we've seen a player that great. Maybe Nikola Jokic. He's kind of the one player that is the closest to that, right? And then his floor and ceiling ability to raise, right? Raising the floor, raising the ceiling of his teams. It was in question, right? In 2021, his legacy was on the line every game, right? And we saw what he did as a floor raiser, carrying a team and an entire offense with a bunch of non-spacers, a bunch of non-shooters, G Leaguers, guys who were out of the league the next season. And he just completely carried that team. 32 points, 65 and a half true shooting, third in MVP voting, scoring title, and playing in pick and roll, playing in motion, two-man game with Draymond, right? And so he was playing with the likes of Michael Mulder, JTA, second-year Jordan Poole, Kelly Oubre, Andrew Wiggins, who had just really gotten comfortable in his first full season with the Warriors, Draymond Green, Kevon Looney. So he was playing with compromised lineups, compromised personnel, guys who weren't necessarily well-rounded, two-way players. And he managed to bring them to the 8th seed. Whether they lost in the play-in or not, they were the 8th seed, and he won the scoring title. Those are facts. And as a ceiling raiser, I mean, we can't even begin to discuss that, right? We talk about 2015, 2022, and even during the KD years, 2017, 2018, just as a creator, as a guy that creates scoring opportunities for his teammates, right? In the pick and roll, off the ball, like as a ceiling raiser, making his teams that are already good all-time great. We saw in 2015, we saw in 2016, we saw in 2017, and then we saw in 2022, right? A historically bad offense for a championship team. 17th in offense. But he was the primary creator as just when you talk about scoring and playmaking. So he managed to carry that team offensively throughout the regular season and during the playoffs. And that team hung its hat on defense. But make no mistake, they're not the number one defense and winning the championship unless Steph Curry is on the court and making that number one defense workable on offense. You see, that's the difference, is that many players can't play with the personnel that's required to achieve a number one defense. But Steph is. Non-spacers, guys who may not be as skilled from a shot-making standpoint, less creators on the floor, right? Being the primary ball handler. And as a small 6'3" guard, being able to compensate for those deficiencies across, especially in the front court, right? You look at your power forward and center spot, and you're probably getting around 15 points combined. And the only reason they're combining for over 10 assists is because of you. Because you're moving off the ball. Because you're running pick and roll. Because you're the one getting trapped and blitzed. So he basically makes that front court defense work on offense and allows them to be on the court to attain a number one defense. And see, that gets missed in a lot of analysis when we talk about Steph Curry. And then he's also a slight positive defensively. I wouldn't call him, a clear positive. I wouldn't call him a net neutral. I think he's a slight positive. Positional discipline, just sliding his feet, not reaching in, right? That was a big issue of his earlier in his career, just gambling more often, not necessarily being as sound. Understanding now how to slide his feet, be, more attentive with how to, staying in front of his man, rotating well, right, sharply, right? We've seen him block Dorian Finney-Smith off of a closeout, in the corner. We've seen him close out on shooters in big-time situations, right? He did a great job against Desmond Bane in that Grizzlies series, right? So sharp rotations, fighting over screens, having that positional discipline to stay in front of his man, reach in when it's required, not foul, and contest, right? And so that improved awareness also over time, just understanding schemes and matchups and improving in that respect as well. his awareness has also become much better, right? He's not getting beat backdoors often. He's not, he's more aware of like who's in front of him, how to read the offense and how it's developing so he can make the right rotations and be in the right spots so he can help as a defender or he can, hold his own, understanding time and score so he's not necessarily, fouling at the wrong times or, giving up a three, right? So things like that he's just become a much smarter defender as well, right? Just more disciplined. And then the final slide for strengths. His physical development over the last few years, gaining power and speed, according to his trainer. And this was even a couple of years ago, but we're seeing it on the court. Like his ability to just be forceful. I feel like he's just more of a presence from a physical standpoint, right? And he's developed that. He's a late bloomer. So we know that it's taken a little bit more time to gain these physical abilities and attributes. And so he's become much better at leveraging that power, leveraging that end-to-end speed. And he's added strength. He's added some bulk, and we've noticed that even since 2018, but noticeably in 2021. And so that added strength has allowed him to take on physical defenses, teams who bump and are physical off the ball, push, grab, claw, pull, right? They do all of these things and they get away with it, but he's able to absorb and fight through this contact consistently because of the added strength. And as well as guard bigger players, right? He's able to guard, at times, bigger players. Like we've seen him hold his own against Jason Tatum in the finals. Just understanding when to strip. Even against Al Horford, just be positionally sound. And even on switches, right? If he's guarding guys like LeBron, right? LeBron didn't really shoot all that well against him in those finals. You look at the numbers, he was quite inefficient. 6 for 26, I believe, was the exact stat. So Steph's ability to just guard bigger players, absorb contact, and just be a rock, not necessarily break down defenses, himself, and stay disciplined, remain, with the contest. That has allowed his teammates to have a much easier time as well, right? Not giving up those blow-bys and guarding, maybe what would many consider a mismatch and excelling in those situations. And then the last, and I think, again, arguably one of the most important things that you could argue for from a strength standpoint, his willingness to sacrifice. And him sacrificing is something that has been, ever since you talk about the Steve Kerr era in 2015, buying into a system, buying into playing off the ball, right? Immediately from the start, from the jump. And so that ability to just be malleable and be, accommodating for your coach and for the personnel that you're around. And he's also sacrificed shot attempts. He's also sacrificed in ways like coming off the bench, taking a back seat for players, right? Taking fewer shots, having less possessions, not gunning for MVP, not necessarily having the shine or the accolades. We've seen it with Kevin Durant, and we've even seen it with guys like Jordan Poole, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, right? He makes it work. He's able to play off the ball, which allows Draymond to be effective and a positive on as a playmaker, as a passer. Giving Jordan Poole ample opportunities as a shot creator to have the ball in his hands with Steph as a spacer, pure spacer off the ball. Klay Thompson, right? Allowing him in transition or even as a shot creator at times, giving him possessions, even off the ball, right? Giving up those plays for Klay to excel and to play to his skill set and to his strengths, right? And sometimes to a fault, and we'll get to that, but he is more than unselfish. And we can talk about KD, where he essentially gave the reins up to KD and said, look, closing situations, you got it, right? You got the volume scoring in the playoffs. We're going to go to you. And in a lot of those close games, it was KD taking the big shot. It was KD, you know, feeling like the guy who is running the offense at times, right? And so we saw Steph, especially in 2017. You talk about David West and Draymond and Iguodala, especially Iggy. Talk about how Steph was over accommodating for KD. He was giving KD ample space to thrive and to feel comfortable within the offense and that sort of thing. So he is more than willing to take a backseat for players that are on his level or even lesser, like an Andrew Wiggins or Jordan Poole or Draymond, right? For Andrew Wiggins, just understanding that, you know, there's times where we have to get him involved, attacking mismatches, getting him, comfortable within the team. So Steph has to balance all of these players and all of these, matchups throughout, when you talk about the roster, 1 through 12, he has to understand, like, how are we going to maximize this team? Which is why I say every Steph Curry team is greater than the sum of its players, because he's able to elevate his teammates. And there's a level of personality you need to do that, right? It doesn't just come from doing it. You need to be able to want to do it, to embrace that mentality and mindset. And so he's one of the most low-maintenance superstars we've ever seen. He doesn't demand things. He's not necessarily asking for exclusive treatment. He's not pouting or asking for more shots, whining about minutes or rotations, opportunity, right? And there's times, obviously, he wants to play more. He's not happy that he's taken out of the fourth quarter, but he doesn't make it known. He doesn't hurt the team in terms of selfishly making it about himself, right? Everybody has a level of desire to play. Everybody has a level of ego, but do you make it about yourself? Are you selfish? Do you make it about you? Do you detract from the winning goal, the main goal, which is winning, right? And so Steph doesn't do that. Steph, in fact, overcompensates for others who may have, uneasiness or discomfort about their opportunity, right? And so he almost makes them comfortable. And then the last thing of the strengths, he leads by example. He's somebody that shows up to work, is the hardest working man in the gym, first to arrive, last to leave, right? And we all understand this. This has been the case since, high school, right? We all watched the documentary where he's just going to work his butt off and earn his spot. And the work never stops. Whether you win the championship, whether you lose in the second round, the routine and the mentality remains the same. And so leading by example, putting in that work ethic, making it all about winning and about your teammates as opposed to yourself and stats and your personal agendas, right? He leads by example. He sets the tone. He creates that winning culture. And he plays the game with joy, right? And that's been the case since early in his basketball life, right? Just expressing himself, laughing on the bench, cracking jokes, right? Keeping it light, keeping it, fun and joyful, keeping it light in practice, right? And you need that. You need guys like that around you who are more accommodating and lighthearted and embracing, right? So you feel like it's a more inclusive culture. And so that's what Steph Curry is the epitome of, somebody that includes and welcomes every player, every skill set, works around their weaknesses and deficiencies in any way he can, and isn't necessarily a burden to his teammates, to his coach, to the front office. He is the least maintenance superstar. He is the most accommodating player of his stature you'll ever see. All right. I know that was like an hour of strengths, damn near. So I'm going to leave the floor to the chat and to the stage to add anything I missed or to expand on anything, because I just went for an hour. on strengths, and I still have weaknesses and expectations. So that was the longest portion of this player profile, but what are your guys' thoughts on the strengths and what I listed and anything to add? And I can go back if you forgot something or if you want to expand on anything, but what are your thoughts on kind of what I've broken down so far? This goes for anyone. B, Shadow, Jermaine, anybody in the chat.
Nah, you summed it up, man. Like, you brought up everything. You brought up leadership. You brought up his role. You brought up how he sacrifices everything. Like, this one was a super.
He tends to be more dependent on perimeter shooting than most stars, superstars. And that's not to say that he's just a shooter, because I would never say that. Obviously, I just broke down how he's one of the greatest scorers ever. But just inherently, being more dependent on perimeter shooting it makes you more prone to shooting variance, right? So we've seen games where Steph will just have a really bad shooting night because the shot quality that he has on a night-to-night basis is just simply lower than most players. Like, the degree of difficulty tends to be just low on his shots. Or, I mean, high. I guess the degree of difficulty is high, right? And low shot quality. So the quality of shots are low, the degree of difficulty is high. And so when you have that, it results in shooting variance. It results in, you remember those games in the finals, and he's had less of these in the playoffs since, but you talk about 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. Like, there were games where he would just have one or two games in every series where he just didn't shoot the ball well. We can talk about that 11-point game in Game 3 versus in 2018 versus the Cavs. I think he had a 14-point game in Game 4 versus the Cavs in 2017. 2016, he had a couple of low production games because he just didn't shoot the ball well. And then 2015, I think that game too, he really struggled to shoot the ball. But he's had less of these since then. I don't think this is as much a weakness because he's really rounded out his game. He's just layered it out. That in-between stuff, right? He's just the array of moves that he has in the mid-range and at the floater spot, in the floater area. He's just so well-rounded now and so layered in his ability to punish a defense that I don't believe this applies to him as much, but still, like, even against the Lakers, I felt he was too perimeter oriented. He was too perimeter reliant. And you can argue that was because of coverage or due to a lack of personnel, right? We just didn't have enough spacing, so he kind of had to be the shooter in those situations. Right? So you can argue that and due to matchup, but even against Anthony Davis in Game 4, I felt as if he settled for two shots. I didn't think they were bad shots. Like, they weren't necessarily bad shots. They were shots that he could make, but inherently they're just low quality shots. They're not high. There's just so high degree of difficulty. You'd hope that he moves away from the perimeter shooting in certain situations, right? And I know that's his bread and butter. I know that's what makes him him. It's his identity. It's his DNA. And so there is a level of live and die by the three, right? There is this idea of, like, Steph is who he is. He's going to live and die by the three. We saw it against Kevin Love in 2016, right? Just settled. He said it. This is coming out of Steph's mouth. He felt he settled. Reflecting back in 2016, he said, I thought I settled. I could have gone by him and I could have got the easy two. We could have gotten a stop and then try to score again. But he settled for a shot. And he kind of forced a look. So I feel like at times he's more dependent on perimeter shooting than he has to be. And just compared to other stars. You look at LeBron, you look at KD. KD's, obviously a perimeter shooter, but he's more so in the mid-range as opposed to the three-point line, right? And so LeBron's also more of a driving threat, a guy that gets to the rim. And those shots are just by nature like higher degree or higher quality and lower degree of difficulty. And part of that has to do with size as well. Like they're 6'9", 6'10", right? So they're wings. So it's easier for them to get those shots off, right? Just because of their size. But what I will say is this. Even though Steph is more dependent on perimeter shooting than compared to other stars, and even for himself in certain clutch situations, I will say that the fact is he's more efficient than those players in the playoffs and the regular season. This is statistically accurate. So whether the case is he tends to be more reliant, around the 3-point line or not, his true shooting and his effective field goal percentage in the regular season and the playoffs is better than both players. So at the end of the day, this isn't something that's necessarily hurting him, but I do feel it's something that he can be more intentional with. Being more, picking his spots a little bit better, particularly in the clutch. Understanding that if your shot isn't falling, going to different counters. And I feel like the last few seasons he's done that way better than he had in 2015 or 16, right? So that's just something that I felt is a pet peeve of mine, and like I said, the shooting variance we've seen, especially in 2022, we saw him, miss shots that were makeable, but those were open looks mostly. I didn't feel like those were a result of him settling. And so in the playoffs, he actually ended up shooting the ball at a rising clip, like a very good clip. So obviously we don't want to take away from who he is because his identity is shooting the basketball. But at the same time, there's a way to kind of balance it to optimize situation, time, score, and being more intentional with how you attack, I feel like. But hey, it is who he is, and that's who he is. He is the greatest shooter ever. So you're gonna live and die by that, and I understand that. Now this is one thing though I feel like we all have had issues with, and the careless live ball turnovers. But I will say the last few seasons he has really corrected this, with the tighter handle, right? Just being more effective in those situations in the pick and roll, and so he's less prone to these live ball turnovers, giving up transition opportunities, and we've seen him have these careless passes at times where he's given up just boneheaded, easy 2 points for the defense, and it just gives away easy points. So I feel like as of late he's been much better with this, especially since 2022, and even 2021. But it's still something that, like against Boston, right? That overhead pass that Jaylen Brown picked off, I believe, and he just got easy 2 points. Like that was a key stretch in Game 4, and obviously he more than made up for it in the fourth quarter with his shot making. But it felt as if that's a pass that's a little bit too loose. You got to be a little bit sharper with that, right? But even last season, I didn't feel like he was necessarily as careless as traditionally he has been, and that's reflected in his turnovers. Like his turnovers have gone down, so he is. I will say that there was one play against Minnesota that stuck out to me, and I'm talking about on the road. This was like mid-season, kind of, or like late season, and he like had a couple of careless passes that were just like unneeded, unforced, and I felt like he could have been better. But I'm kind of nitpicking right now. Like, I think he's improved at this, but there are times where he just should be a little bit sharper with the basketball. And then this is one thing that has kind of been the case throughout his career. He's 6'3", 200 pounds, so he's just a smaller player. And so he does struggle to guard wings at times. If he switched onto certain wings, like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in Game 3 against Boston, really did work on Steph. They just went downhill, bumped him, got to their spots, just shot over him. And so they did a good job of picking on him. But I will say this. As I mentioned in the strengths, Steph has also gotten better at guarding big wings or bigger players as well. So even though he struggles to defend wings in general, there are times like where he was guarding Tatum and he did a really good job moving his feet, holding his own, getting a contest off, or even stripping him for a turnover. So there's the good and the bad, right? He's always going to be smaller, so he's never going to be fully equipped to like an Andrew Wiggins to slide his feet laterally, get to that shot pocket and contest. But there are times where he can use his positioning, use his awareness, use his timing and his anticipation to put himself at a positional advantage and maybe get a strip, maybe get a swipe, maybe, put himself in a spot where he can actually win the defensive possession. So it's a give and take, obviously, but all he can do throughout his career is improve as a defender overall, because obviously he can't necessarily improve physically from a height standpoint, or size or frame standpoint, right? Just having long arms to contest, or like being tall so you can see eye to eye. It's just of the nature. It's just of the reality. Now, I will say this. This is something that I want everybody to contribute on, because I feel like this is an open-ended uh, point I have. And even though I mentioned he's a great leader and he leads by example, I do think we should point out that he does have a passive leadership style. And I think, Shadow, I think you can hit on this. I don't know if you're still in. Yeah, you're in here. Uh, do you want to kind of expand on his passive leadership style, because I think it yields more good than bad. Like, I think the passive leader, and I don't really want to call it passive because he empowers, right? It's a leadership style that empowers teammates. It puts the battery in their back and really elevates them, and really makes them feel a part of the group, inclusive, and playing with that joy, and I understand that there's a ton of advantages to it, but there are also disadvantages. Making Jordan Poole feel like he's almost a peer, or like letting Draymond get away with certain antics, like not necessarily holding him as accountable as you should. I feel like there is some negatives to the passive leadership style. Also, that's a good point. Someone put in the chat. Uh, Playing off the ball at times and not necessarily putting his foot down and being as aggressive in the offense, like leaning too much into the motion offense, which inherently is designed to elevate his teammates and to get them involved. Like, I feel as if there's times that it's a detriment to the team, and it's almost too passive, it almost hurts us too much. So, do you guys want to kind of speak on like the passive leadership style? Because I do feel like it's something that he has corrected. By the way, this offseason, he's been more proactive. He's been setting the tone. He has set the standard. He has voiced his concerns and setting the agendas aside, and putting his foot down early so we don't arise with these issues late, right? This media tour, he has voiced that approach heavily, no doubt. But I do still feel as if the last couple of seasons he could have been better with approaching certain situations. So, Shadow, do you want to kind of speak on that a little bit with the passive leadership style, if you can?
I agree. I think if you remember his first game back last year, I don't know if it was after the shoulder. It was against Phoenix. That Phoenix game when we were getting killed by Damian Lee. Steph had an opportunity in that game. He was just standing corner. Remember in the fourth quarter he went for like 20 points and we're like, you couldn't do that shit all game.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So, stuff like that is definitely something that I want to see Steph, like when the game's tight or when the game is like you see your team's down. Let's not rely on your teammates. I get it. It's nice to, have that, but we know in the playoffs that changes. But I would like to see that a little bit more in the regular season.
No, I agree. I think he can strike a better balance of, getting his teammates involved and empowering them, making them feel like, they have free reins and are involved in the offense, but also kind of getting back to himself and putting his foot down and really being aggressive at times. So I agree with you. And one game that sticks out to me is against the Timberwolves. This was a home game, and we had lost this. This was pretty late in the season, and I remember there was like a 4 or 5 minute stretch in the third quarter where we just couldn't score, and we just kept running the motion over and over and over, and Steph just kept leaning into it and beating the dead horse, and it felt as if we could have switched it up and switched it up a bit and gone to him a little bit more. And it's on him, like Steve has said at times, that Steph kind of is an extension of like he can do what he wants. If he wants to run pick and roll, if he wants to be aggressive as a scorer or get others involved, like there is a degree of responsibility that he has on like setting that pace, setting that standard and the tone for the team. So it is really on him because he is the decision maker with that respect. Like he dictates kind of the flow. So yeah, no, absolutely right. And then I also mentioned the last thing, and this has been the case for a handful of years now. And maybe I would say the first notice of it was like around 2019. Is there has been a little bit of physical regression. And I'm not saying that this matters that much because I don't think it does. Because he's adjusted in other ways, right? I said earlier he's added strength, he's added some power and some speed to him, right? But there is a little bit of regression when it comes to changing direction, right? Like you watch his film from 2013, 2014, 2015, even through 2017, right? His ability to just be shifty and slithery and have that zip and pop, just from a directional standpoint, angular, just movements and a variety of ways. And part of that had to do with just he was just thinner and more lean, kind of. So he can kind of, obviously he's put on 10 to 15 pounds since. So there's a physical trade-off there. So there is like a little bit of changing direction that I have seen that he's a little bit he's not as sharp with, and that's been the case for a chunk of time now. So that's one thing, and then the other thing is his short area quickness, like I mentioned, the zip, the ability to just kind of be more continuous with his movements, and it could be also a result of play style, right? He has been less on the ball post 2016. Like this is statistically accurate. So there is some of that, right? We haven't just seen him put in as many situations to be as fluid. Like I just don't feel he's as a fluid physically. He's not as physically fluid as I felt, 6-7 years ago. But at the end of the day, that was never something he hung his hat on. Like Urkel always likes to say, like Steph had his old man game coming into the NBA. So even though he came into the league with like a level of quickness and like changing direction and kind of like this fluid movement type of stuff, like as he's gotten older, he has lost some of that, but it hasn't really mattered because he's gained the strength. He's gained some power and some of that like end-to-end speed and conditioning. Like he's added so many physical attributes and improvements in other ways that is kind of offset this. But like most of all, his play style is on the perimeter, and like I said, like his old man game kind of has remained the same throughout his career. Like he's just on and off the ball. Like he's going to come off a pin down, he's going to come off a curl, he's going to use his body in a variety of ways to create separation. And he's kind of adjusted. Like part of him losing some of that fluidity is maybe a result, or sorry, maybe the result of him losing that fluidity is that, like what I mentioned earlier, how effective he is with his handle. Like that might be a result of that, where like he's like, okay, maybe I'm not as sharp or quick, like physically in terms of like my movements, and I can adjust to that by like being more intentional with how I like put the ball on the floor in fewer moves, get to the same spot. Right? He's getting to the same spots, but in fewer moves. And he's not as flashy. He's not as like, he's not pounding the ball as much and going behind the back and executing all these combos, performing a bunch of, different types of combinations and moves. But what he is doing is he's effectively adding a level of creativity, but being efficient in those spots, being, efficient, getting into the mid range, right? He doesn't really do too much. He's just kind of like that one dribble pull up or like that 2 dribble step back. Gets to the paint with the floater, little step back 3, like one dribble, like jab step, triple threat. Like he's not like coming up the court and doing the double behind the back crossover step backs that we once saw. And so that doesn't mean that he can't do it, because we have seen him do it at times. But I feel like he's been a more efficient player given the circumstances, because people got to understand defenses have become more equipped to guard Steph Curry since 2016. Why? Because they've had more film. They've had, they understand it better, right? They've caught up. But the difference is they just haven't caught up to the point where he can't compete for a championship. Like, he's going to set that standard till he retires. The Warriors are going to compete till he retires. But there has been a little bit of catching up where offenses have caught up. So he's just been a better player from a cerebral standpoint. He's compensated for that over time. Because there were times where even in 16 where he was guarded in drop coverage. Defenses and teams didn't know necessarily what the best scheme was, right? You would see switching, and that didn't really work at times. And then you would see like trapping, but that really, because Draymond is so great in those years, like it just didn't yield positive results for the defense. You would see like all these different things thrown, and nothing worked. But like teams now, they'll kind of have a scheme, and they'll stick with it, and it really won't work. But the difference is the offense on the other side, right? The other side of the court has caught up. So now teams understand how to be more efficient with their offense, with their play calls, with their sets. So they've caught up offensively from that standpoint. And so now Steph has to kind of adjust and be more efficient from his standpoint. So even though back then, like his numbers and his like production seemed more dominant, right? Like his efficiency was better. People would say like, yeah, like relative to the league, he was more dominant. And this part of his game was better. That part of his game is better. Like, part of why he doesn't look as good now as he was then is because he's not as good relative to the league. And part of that is because the league is better offensively. This is a statistical fact. The league has improved overall. Like, you look at offensive rating across the NBA from 2016 until 2023, 7 years, teams have gotten better. So he has to have gotten better in other ways. And so that being like a high volume, like pounding the ball and just wasting motion, right? Wasting motion on the perimeter is not efficient. And I feel like as of the last 3 seasons, he's understood like no wasted motion. I'm going to get to my spots and hit the same shots I've always hit at an efficient clip, because I have to find ways to be more effective. Why? I've lost a little bit of quickness, but also teams have kind of caught up. So how do I give myself the edge, right? Because you see a lot of these point guards and a lot of these players, right? They rely on fouls. Steph doesn't rely on fouls. So how can he be more efficient as a scorer, right? Overall, because when these players don't get their foul calls, that's an edge for Steph Curry in the playoffs, right? And so that's something that, like, I didn't even add that as a strength, but like one of the strengths is that he's not dependent on getting to the free throw line. And part of that is like, okay, how do I round out my game so that, because I'm not, like in the regular season, these teams have kind of caught up. In the playoffs, they haven't caught up at all. See, that's the difference. Like, you look at the NBA, the way offenses and teams have kind of run, like 5 out, 4 out, 4 out, 1 in, like spread offense, front court shooting. To the naked eye, it's like, oh shit, like these teams are bombing threes and all these shot creators, and guys can put the ball on the floor, and look at that, look at this, and get to the free throw line. Offensive ratings have just skyrocketed. But in the playoffs, we saw in 2022 the gap between the Warriors and the rest of the league. So last season, we weren't there because of our defense, but offensively, I thought we had enough to win. It was mostly the defense. And so we need to get back to a good defensive team, an elite, not just good, elite defensive team. But my point is, offensively, while the league has caught up to some extent in the regular season, they haven't caught up in the playoffs. You know why? Because if you're dependent on free throws and you're dependent on shooting, you're not getting those free throws in the playoffs, which offsets that impact, because Steph's already not getting free throws. So he's not even dependent on that. He's already efficiently scoring without free throws. So if you're not getting the free throws you usually get, now that hurts you even more in the playoffs. The second thing, you're not as good a shooter as Steph Curry, and you're going to experience greater variance, right? That shooting is not sustainable in a 7-game series as much as it is if it's Steph Curry or Klay Thompson to a lesser degree. And see, that's the big thing as well. That's why the gap in the playoffs has never really changed between the Warriors and the rest of the league, is because Steph Curry's ability to translate his game is actually more built for the playoffs if you think about it. It used to be more built for the regular season. You could argue that. Used to, like a decade ago. But now it's more built for the playoffs because he doesn't depend on free throws, which a lot of teams and players do, and he does depend on shooting, but he'll be efficient in other ways, and he's a better shooter who experiences less variance than those teams and players. So, like, you look at the Celtics in Game 4, when we beat them, Steph hit, I think, 6 or 7 threes in that game, and they were hitting everything. I don't know how many threes they had combined. It was like 11 or something. And Steph had like 7 by himself. So, like, you see stuff like that, and you're like, okay, the league really hasn't caught up, because in the biggest moments, on the biggest stage, his skill set translates. The fact that it's unnecessary for him to foul bait and take that physical toll of just driving to the paint and drawing contact every possession, like a James Harden, like a Luka, even like an Embiid, SGA, guys like that. The fact that that's not a big part of his game maybe hurts him in the regular season, but sure as hell doesn't hurt him in the playoffs, because those teams are dependent on that. And when they don't get those calls, then it kind of it neutralizes the playing field. It offsets, it evens it out. And then you talk about variance. Steph experiences far less variance than any of these players or teams, because they're not near the shooter that he is, right? They're not near his level of shooter from a skill standpoint and consistency standpoint. So that's the big thing. That's the big separator. And so, yeah, like, I know some of these things have been overblown by some people, right? There's some people that think, like, Steph has declined, and we heard this years ago, whatever. And, like, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying these are noticeable changes over time, things that he can correct, right? When in terms of turnovers, he can correct that. In terms of being a better leader in certain situations, I think he can correct that. Positionally, I don't think he can, like, he's just small. Like, he's 6'3". It is what it is. So all he can do is just be a better defender in the ways he can be better. Like, understanding schemes, coverages, tendencies, like personnel, like where to be, anticipation, timing, all that stuff. And then being more dependent on perimeter shooting, I think he can adjust and reel it in at times. I feel like in the clutch, he should try to, like, get to the floater area a bit more. Like, remember in the Kings series, I felt like that game 5, he was pretty aggressive in the paint, and he was just slicing up their defense. And it's obviously easier to do that against Sabonis than it is against Anthony Davis, but I just feel like if you have AD on a switch, if you miss one perimeter shot and you have a chance at another possession, I think you should just try to get to the basket. But that's the reality, is that you're going to live and die with the 3 with Steph, because at the end of the day, that's his bread and butter. That's his identity. So it's just part of his nature, and I understand that. And then the last thing, like I said, physical regression in terms of the quickness and the changing direction. That's just a part of, like, biology. As you get older, you're not as quick twitch. You're not going to be as, like, physically capable of making the same movements as you would a decade ago. Like, you're just not the same guy. But what you can do is be more effective overall in your game. And the good news is Steph was never really reliant on his, like, it was more of like a luxury early in his career to, like, have that slithery shiftiness that could, like, allowed him to kind of bend defenses, beat guys off the bounce a little bit, and hit, like, more skillful shots, right? Like, you watch Steph, he was way more slender, way more skinny in 2013, 2014, and that time than he was now. And there was, like, a level of, like, quick burst and speed that he had that he doesn't have now. But what I will say is his end-to-end speed and, like, conditioning-wise, I think he's better, because you look at baseline to baseline, he can, and from second 0 to 10, he's the same from second 12 to 24. Like players, he used to get tired. His conditioning wasn't what it is now. He used to gas out when he was like earlier in his career, from in 2013 and 2014. And then I think once Steve kind of implemented the motion, he was able to incorporate more conditioning, more of a conditioning regimen to his game, and so he expanded his ability to just go baseline to baseline or relocate and still maintain his level of play and his efficiency. So these are just things that I've noticed over time, and some of these are hot button points. I understand that, but I'm just saying my observation. So if you guys disagree, or if you want to add anything or whatever, like, feel free. Stage or chat. Anything?
I don't got anything to say. I think you covered just about
Yeah,
everything.
you're killing this, dog.
Would you agree with all these?
I agree.
Absolutely.
Everything is accurate.
Okay. I don't want, because I know people, like, I know, like, there's certain things that people have said, and it, like, triggers people, like, like, oh, he's a small guard, it's different for him, and like, oh, he's, like, gained all this muscle, so he's, like, not the same shooter, and he doesn't have the same zip, but, like, there is a little bit of truth to that, but there also is the flip side of, like, he's found ways to overcome and be more effective as a player as he's gotten older. Like, yeah, like, there is some truth to it. I don't want to overblow it, but, like, we are talking about weaknesses, so this is like, these are things that I feel like are part of the reality. All right, expectations. So consistent starting role and minutes at point guard, right? We all know, like, that's not changing. Motion offense, right? He's the center of it. So shot making off of actions, whether it be like the traditional split action, right? We run the split action. We run a bunch of pin downs and curls and off plays and sets. So kind of like that sort of thing. Yeah, I can expect that to continue. Nothing's going to really change next year from that standpoint. I do expect him to be used as a floor spacer next to CP. I think we'll see situations where CP has the ball at top of the key, and he's just, operating in the pick and roll, and Steph is just right there, catch and shoot, ready to fire, and the defense really, like, schematically, they just cannot help off him. Like, it would literally get you benched if you help off Steph Curry on the weak side wing or corner. Like, you just can't. So he will probably be used as like a floor spacer next to Chris Paul. And there were times he was used as like a floor spacer next to Jordan. I think CP, if you operate in the pick and roll and you use Steph as a floor spacer, I think that's far more effective than having Jordan isolate or like go downhill or like even run pick and roll than it would be Chris Paul in those situations. So I expect him to be used more off the ball, just maybe in a variety of ways. And don't forget, like, he will not just be just catching, shooting, and standing there. There will be times where we run him through the motion offense, and he's just spacing the floor continuously, right? Like, he's never going to stop moving on most actions. So he may start in one corner and end on the other wing. Like, and CP is a guy that's going to find him. Like, he's equipped to find him off of those actions, off of those movements. So, like, even though, like, he may not be, like, on the ball the whole time, I do think that he'll be more effective, right, overall, as just like a floor spacer and used next to one of the passers and playmakers we've ever seen. Like, Shadow made the great point. Chris Paul is going to make Steph Curry better than any player can make him better. Like, Draymond's made him better, and that's nothing to take away from him. But just as a pure playmaker and, like, decision maker, CP's probably the best Steph is ever going to play with. Also, pick and roll ball handler, right? We all know that we're going to run more pick and roll next year, strike a better balance. Steph has always been atop the league of pick and roll points per possession, and across NBA history, I think the greatest pick and roll player ever statistically. Like, he's gonna have the ball in his hands. They're gonna run ball screens, and he's gonna be efficient in those spots, whether on the ball as a shot creator, putting the ball on the floor and just hitting shots, step backs, off of screens, just like pulling up, or you might see him attacking mismatches. So if teams decide to switch, he's just going to beat his man off the bounce or try to break him down in however way he can to try to provide a different advantage. So whether it be like a driving kick or getting to the basket, or even just taking a jumper that he's comfortable with, like he's going to attack mismatches. He's going to create off the bounce. And I'll even add, like, he's going to play, like I said, in the pick and roll. He's going to be more of a passer this year in some ways too. Like I expect us to incorporate more movement and more play calls. Like we might see some Spain pick and roll. You know what I'm saying? And so when you have a play call like that, there's more optionality there. There's more diversity and layers to how you can attack and counter a defense. So stuff like that, I think we're just going to see more versatility with the playbook. And that's on Steve, right? That's on Steve. And I would even say CP3, Draymond, and Steph are going to be, they're going to have to be vocal as to like what we need to do to optimize the roster from a play calling standpoint, from like the sets we run, what can we do to like put each of our guys in the best position possible to elevate their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. So I expect that. I also mentioned he'll be a net neutral or slight positive defensively. Last season I felt like was a down defensive year for him. The season before that was probably his best on-ball defensive season ever. Not probably, it was. And he was among the best like defenders from a statistical standpoint in the NBA that year. Like from the guard position in 2022, Steph was an incredible defender, and he really leaned into it. And it did take away from his legs at some point during the regular season. Like when you defend that hard, every possession consistently for a string of games, like it's going to take a little bit of a toll on you. So there needs to be a little bit of a balance between how hard he defends and so he's able to carry the offense in his own way, right? He doesn't want to leave shots short and have like tired legs in February, or March. Like we kind of saw that, or not even that late, like even in November, December, like he kind of had that slump November, December, January. Like it felt as if he was starting to gain a little bit of rhythm a little bit later, but he had missed some time towards the end of the year, which kept him fresh for the playoffs, actually. So we need to preserve his legs. We need to preserve his minutes. We need to preserve his body. And we want him to be a positive defender slightly. He'll never be like a clear positive because very few players are a clear positive. But he can always get to that slight positive. And I'm talking just individual defense. Because we know that with Steph, you can still put 4 defenders around him, and he can make that lineup work. And in a way, him empowering and allowing a lineup like that to be on the floor is adding to like the defensive ceiling and even the floor of the team overall. So individually, I just expect him to be at least average, if not slightly above average defensive, which I don't think is too much to ask. And there just needs to be a balance struck. And then the last thing I said about that is continue to be active on the boards. Just, we know he averaged a career high 6.1 rebounds last year. And over the last 2 years, like I mentioned, he's averaging 5.6 rebounds. So that's a significant mark. For a guard, 6'3", point guard, 6 rebounds is a big deal. So I expect him to be, still engaged and fighting on the glass. And obviously we don't want him to just be reckless, but there needs to be a little bit of that's your best player, and your best player's, is walking the walk. He is putting his body, and he is basically, there were games he was out rebounding Clay, Wiggins, and Draymond. There were games like that. So I expect that to continue. And then the last thing, leadership. Setting the tone early. And he's done this all summer, right? All offseason, Steph's done a great job setting the tone, being proactive, making it known that, this is no nonsense. We're all about business this year. No agendas. Put that stuff to the side. We're here to win. We're here to play winning basketball. And we're here to figure this out so we can, extend our core, extend this prime, and maximize the years we have left. So his winning mentality is going to translate to his leadership as well, because at the end of the day, he understands like there is a finite timeline to this thing, and so he needs to be, and he is more conscious about that, and so that's reflected in his leadership, setting the tone, setting the stage for next season. And then last thing, just continue to lead by example. Play with the joy that he always plays with. Empower his teammates. Get guys involved. Obviously, be the first guy in the gym, last one out. Work ethic. Make it all about winning. It's all about winning a championship. And once that mentality is contagious throughout the locker room, it results in a season like 2022. Right? We need it to be contagious, and it starts with him. And I felt like last season, he tried to express that in a way, because remember early on we really struggled, and he was like trying to dig us out of these holes and win us these games. Remember against Sacramento, he had like 47 points at home, and he was just doing everything in his power. Like against Indiana, he had like 36 points at halftime. He was just battling. But like, I think there needs to be a degree of vocal leadership, like we saw against the Kings in Game 7, or like right before that, right? Right before Game 7, he had a speech telling everybody, look, if you can't put your emotions aside, if you're not ready to compete and get on that bus, then don't come. Like, and basically he dropped 50, like, long story short. So he said, look, I'm going to do my job, just be there along with me for the ride, and I'll take care of the rest. And he did his job, man. Like, he led by example there. And that's kind of the balance I want to see him strike. If he sees something going wrong or something, some slippage, the hope is that he does, put his foot down and say, look, this is unacceptable. We can't get used to losing. We can't get used to this type of feeling. And we need to correct this. And, if you're not along for the ride, don't come on the bus. Like, I'm here to win. And if you guys just trust me, and trust that I'm going to deliver, and you just have my back, then we're going to win. And that's kind of the message that, he sent last year, but it was a little bit too late. I felt like it needed to be sent early on. So if he can just set the tone early and continue to lead by example, also vocally, I think that would pay major dividends next season as well. My voice is practically gone. Does anybody on stage want to add anything? Or like in the chat in terms of expectations? Anything at all? Expectations or
I
thoughts?
expect him to not try to carry as much this year, because I do think our team will be better, so he won't be forced to, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes complete sense. I'm actually gonna get into that, those stats, the projection, on the next slide. Anybody have anything else to add in terms of like strengths, weaknesses, expectations, or do you want to like expand on anything that I've said or anything like that?
I feel like you've covered everything, bro. You've been talking for a long time. Your voice needs a break.
All right, I'll move on to the final slide. Give me like 10 seconds. I want to just tweet this out. Coming up. All right, let's move on to the player projection. So, next season, I have Steph 34.2 minutes per game. So he's going to play about, I have him at mid-30s. Now, last season, I think he was at 34.7, I think around that. So I think he's going to be around the same. I think it'll be a little bit of a dip. I don't think he's going to need to play as much because of CP's presence. I think with CP in the mix, I think we can kind of run him more out there at times. We have Corey Joseph, obviously, as our third stringer. So I don't think there's a need for Steph to like play heavy minutes. And if we're going to have a winning brand of basketball, the less minutes that he plays, the better, at least in the regular season. So we're going to need Steph to, play good, a chunk of minutes, a good amount of minutes. But it's better to be low 30s low 34 than high 34. Like if it's like 34 point, or yeah, like 34.2 or 34.3, something like that, like that is a win. But if it's like 34.7 or 34.8, then that's not good because those extra, minutes add up. And that tells me that we're just not a championship team if he has to play so much. I have him a little bit under 27 points per game, about 5.6 rebounds, a little over 6 assists, about a steal and change, and then 0.3 blocks. A little bit less than 49 from the field, a little over 42 from three, and a little bit less than 92 at the line. So 27, 6 and 6, a steal, 49, 42, 92 splits is what I have him at next year. I don't think his production will be as much from a scoring standpoint. I don't think he'll need to. I just think having CP out there as a playmaker, having guys that are more balanced, right? If we're achieving balance, we don't need Steph to save us and carry us. Traditionally the higher scoring seasons that Steph has don't end well. So we need him to be in like the mid to high 20s, like 25 to 27. And so I have him at around 26.7. I just think we're gonna have better balance and better continuity next year. I don't think he'll have to play as much. The assists, the same traditional 6 he always gets, right, around the same there. And then the rebounds, I have him a little bit less than last year, but it's partly because I think Kuminga's going to take a step as a rebounder. I think also he won't play as many minutes, so by nature, he won't get as many rebounds. And I just think overall as a team, we'll buy into that gang rebounding concept much more. So, you talk about all these things like, yeah, his production is going to look worse than last, but that means that we're a championship team, which is why I have everything going down, except for steals. And so his 1.2 steals per game. And then the field goal and 3-point percentage I have slightly down than last year. So last season he shot 49.3 from the field. I have him at 48.7. And the only reason I have that is because I do think there will be points in the season that he does sacrifice a little bit too much to the point where it's a detriment to his own game. Like there may be a point where he's, trying to get CP super comfortable, or Clay might be, struggling, and Steph's game isn't really it's not getting off as much as we need it to. And so it affects his efficiency. It affects his rhythm, right? I think his rhythm might be affected at some point trying to get CP involved. I still think he'll have an efficient year. I just don't think it'll be as efficient as last year, because last season it was pretty clear cut. Like, I'm going to have to dominate for us to win. And that wasn't a winning formula, but it was a winning formula for Steph's numbers. And so next season, I think it'll be somewhere in between last season and somewhere in between 2022, right? It'll be somewhere in between there, where there will be stretches where he may struggle to be efficient, and he may not be, in rhythm out there, and his minutes might be a little choppy, and he's trying to get CP and Clay and Wiggins all balanced and involved. But also, he's going to have games where he's just super efficient, carrying us and willing us to victory. Like, there will be games like that as well. But we're building a championship team here. This is about winning a championship. This isn't about, trying to pile up as many stats, as much efficiency as you can, right? So if that's the case, then the idea is his production goes down, his efficiency suffers a little bit because he's trying to achieve that balance. I do have his free throw percentage actually a little bit higher. And the last thing is plus 471 plus minus. Last season he was at a plus 500. His championship season in 2022, he was at a plus 507. I think he'll play minutes this year than he did that year. I also think he'll have less. He'll miss more games. And not from an injury standpoint, but from just a rest standpoint. I actually think we're going to be a high seed. So I think there will be games where we just don't play him. And I think, so plus 507, plus 471, it kind of is around the same. It's like a differential of 30 or 35. So yeah, within a few games, you could argue here or there, he might miss extra. But his impact is going to be close to that. Last season, he was a plus 268, I believe. I believe it was a plus 268 or something. So it was mid 200s, and he played 59 games. So that's not really that good for him. And that was reflected on the court. Like, we were just not a good team even with Steph on the court. And that's reflected in the net rating and the advanced numbers. So next season, I expect us to be closer to that 2022 year in terms of impact, in terms of like kind of style and like the issues we run into. We will run into some issues. Like, there will be moments where Steph is everybody involved that his game suffers. And I'm okay with that personally because I understand it's for the greater good. Because in the playoffs, everybody's ready at that point. Andrew Wiggins was ready. Klay Thompson in 2022, even though he struggled at times, was way more ready than he was last year. And Jordan Poole was ready. So striking that balance is incredibly important. And I don't really put as much stock in the regular season as I do the playoffs, obviously, for good reason, because we're competing for titles. And the last point I'm going to make is I probably should have done a player projection in terms of playoff numbers, but I expect Steph to be a playoff riser next year in terms of efficiency. I think he can get to 50, 40, 90 in the playoffs. I think he's that great. I think he's that skilled. I think he's at a point in his career mentally where he knows nobody can guard him. No team has an answer for him. I think he'll be close. If he doesn't hit 50, 40, 90, he'll be like 49.4, 41.1, and like 90, 92 at the line, something like that. And I think on like 28 points per game. I think he'll be a playoff riser next year. Last year, he was a playoff riser in terms of production, but his efficiency dropped. And that was because the team wasn't good. Like, the spacing was bad. We didn't have enough scorers around him to take the pressure off of him. So he was forced into like tough, low quality, high degree of difficulty shots. And it just wasn't efficient. And in that Lakers series, he just ran out of gas. He just ran out of juice. So that's what I see for next year. Any thoughts or anyone want to add anything to expectations? Or not expectations, but the projection itself?
I think 26.7 is right around where he's probably going to be if the team is going to be a successful playoff team. Because looking at his all-time stats when he's, in the regular season when he's won a championship, it's around that number. He's never really won a championship being
That's true.
a crazy
Yeah, when he
scorer.
averages over 28 points per game, they don't win titles.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I took all of that into consideration when I was thinking about this. So I really try to fine-tune these numbers so they could reflect kind of how I think the season's going to go, but also what balance do we need statistically to actually signify a championship team. And for Steph, this is kind of the numbers I came up with.
Personally, I feel like the field goal percentage is going to be a little bit lower since he's going to be taking less amount of shots. So like he might not be able to recover his field goal
That's fair
percentage.
too. He might be at around 47.6 or 47.9 or something like.
But yeah,
he
this
might
is pretty
be like.
good.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I still think he'll be a playoff riser personally because I think the team is going to be so much more balanced next year from a top to bottom standpoint. So it'll take a lot of pressure off him. Like, we'll have a floor spacer like Saric. We'll have Chris Paul relieve him of the creation or playmaking duties and responsibilities that he has. Like, and Klay is going to come in shape. He's going to be a better version of himself. I think all of these collective things are going to result in a better outcome for Steph from like a responsibilities and load standpoint, but his numbers might suffer a little bit because he's going to have to find a way to fit in like he did in 2022. But it's better that way than to have the role players fit around him. Because if that's what's happening, then that means that Steph is getting his buckets and he's doing his thing. Like, think about 2021. He won the scoring title. He was dominating every team in front of him. But like, we tried to find that balance, but we didn't have enough to do it. So, like, it just ended up being high-volume Steph. And we didn't have enough, 1 through 8 that year. Like, JTA, Michael Mulder, a second-year Andrew Wiggins, and a first one, for the complete
That year
season.
was so ass, bro.
Yeah, we just weren't equipped, right? You need to have balance. Look at the Nuggets last year. Look at the Bucks in 2021. That's what you need to win a title. So, any other thoughts on the strengths, weaknesses,
I feel like
expectations
he has to work on
projection.
his durability as well. I feel like when he's shooting, when he's going down in the lane, he's not really protecting himself when he falls down. He's like going crazy. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think this season he'll be a little bit more perimeter oriented than he was last year. I felt like there were times he was just driving a lot for a regular season type of game. I think next season we'll see him a little bit more like he'll probably take like 11, 12 threes like he did last year, but less twos. Like I think his field goal attempts are going to go down, and I think it's going to come from the 2-point range instead of the 3-point range.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna add this real quick. I do think he's actually gonna come out in the season at the start of the season. I think he's gonna come out setting a tone, and it's gonna come out on fire. I could be totally off base with that one, but like in 2020, in that 2022 season, he did basically the same thing where he came out on fire, and then as we got towards like January, February, he started deferring and letting Clay get his shots, letting Wiggs get involved, letting Poole get his shots. So I think he will start out like his numbers will start out like pretty good, and as we get throughout the season, I think they may trail off a bit, but that's what I think is going to happen.
I agree. I think he's gonna come out with an aggression to give them like a good record to start out the year, like we did in 2022 when we was like 15-2. Probably gonna come out and do something similar, and as the year goes along and they build up a good enough record, he's gonna defer to the younger guys like Kaminga, Moody, Clay, Chris Paul, making sure they get comfortable.
All right, man. This concludes the player profile series. We did 11 episodes, so that was pretty good. I know this one obviously was like just basically me talking for like 2 hours. So if you made it this far, thank you, because I didn't think it'd be like this, but I couldn't strike the balance between me and like the chat and the speakers because I was just on a roll. But yeah, my voice is probably gone right now, so I appreciate everybody for tuning in to all of these episodes. Even if you missed some, whatever, like I appreciate you for tuning in the ones you did. This will be on YouTube, like all of them are. So if you want to catch up or if you ever want to refer back to them, you can go on YouTube and rewatch them or try to, reflect on our predictions or our analysis. And this was fun. This was definitely a fun thing. And hopefully we can look back next season if, we win the title and we look right. We look like, these numbers are pretty accurate and the optimism ends up becoming reality. But I appreciate everybody. And I'm going to start Urkel's playback now. But peace out.